So how are you all? Doing okay? Now, I have a confession to make. Since I couldn't find my catechism that I wanted to look at last week, I didn't take it home with me, and if I didn't take it home with me, I didn't prepare. So now, be gentle with me, because I don't really, I'm not sure where exactly we are, but I believe we were on page 29, is that sound right?
73.
73?
73.
Okay, well that'll do that. Page 73. Okay, and what heading were we on?
I think we
Huh?
I think it's 45.
45. Okay, what is the summary of the commandments, the fourth commandment through the 10th commandment, known as the second tablet? Love your neighbor as yourself, Matthew 22:39. If you look at the first tablet of the law, you shall have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Those in fact, obviously have to do with our relationship between us and God. The first tablet of the law. The second tablet of the law has to do with our relationship with one another. For example, thou shalt not murder, or thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, and so forth and so on. So now we're talking about the second tablet of the law, that is our relationship with one another. First, I would like to also say that if we do not have a relationship with God, it's really downhill after that, you know what I'm saying? And now, heading 46, who is our neighbor? Now, one of the things that we need to be aware of is the fact that people who are in church are in fact our neighbor, but everyone is our neighbor. Everyone who claims to belong to humanity. So the guy next door, the guy three houses down, 4 floors up, the Muslim, the Jew, the Buddhist, they are in fact our neighbors. That doesn't mean that they have the faith, but they are our neighbors, so we shouldn't kill them either, right? One of the things that the big difference, and may I say this without being too impolitically correct, or that's a double negative. Our scriptures say that under no circumstances except in self-defense, or when God himself commands us to take life, taking life is wrong. That's not the case in the Quran. If you look at the Quran, you will find that it basically says, kill the infidels. Kill the infidels. If they do not believe in Allah, they are to be killed. And they are not only to be killed, but they are to be tortured and mistreated. Now, someone had said, I think a pundit somewhere down the road, I was reading somewhere, that what they need to do is to go, quote, have their own reformation, right? That they need to get back to their scriptures and understand what that all means. The truth of the matter is, folks, Islam has had its reformation. And the reformation is they take their scriptures or their holy word, their holy writ, as in fact literal. So when somebody like Osama bin Laden reads the Quran and it says kill the infidels, torture the infidels, what is he doing? He's had his reformation. He's looked at his holy book and he's come to the conclusion that that's what I'm supposed to do. Not so with the Christian faith. The Christian faith does in fact believe that self-defense is Luther spoke about the just and unjust war. He spoke about self-defense and so forth and so on. But the truth of the matter is, when somebody says the Muslims have to have their reformation, you can respond, they have. That's what Osama bin Laden was all about. Okay? Their reformation is evil. So, just so you know that. Does that mean that we hate all Muslims? Remember the old adage from our Lutheran understanding, hate the sin, love the sinner. So we need to be careful and guided by the fact that we are, and this is a fine line, that we are called to love our neighbor. We're still called to love them. That doesn't mean that we can't shoot them in the eye when they're trying to shoot us. Right? Okay. Who is our neighbor? All peoples are our neighbors. Galatians 6:10. As we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially those who are of the household of faith. Now, this is kind of interesting. It says, let us do good for all those outside the church, but also especially those who are in the household of faith. That is us. That is, in some respects, the Missouri Synod, the Southeastern District. When we lie to one another, or when we debase one another, or when we in fact hurt one another in an evil sort of way, in a sinful sort of way, we do in fact break the first four, the last 6 commandments. I think we need to be especially careful that since we are in the household of faith, that we are to be, in some ways, I would even go as far as to say that we should especially reach out to someone and reach out to each other in love. One of the things that you'll find is there's a fine line between caring for one another and discussing the needs of others with others, and then being a gossiper. Being a gossiper is a slanderous thing, and it ruins many churches. There's really not a whole lot that one can say about that, other than the fact that you can revert them back to the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, or to God. We do it all the time. Even when we don't mean to do it, we do it. But then we have to squelch that. So we need to especially be loving towards those in the household of faith. One of the things, let me just say this too. You know, you remember the whole priest controversy with abuse of children and so forth. Now, it's bad enough when a man abuses a child. It is almost 3 times as bad when that priest or that minister abuses children and misuses his position of authority within the church. Those kids, for example, that were abused when they were altar boys or whatever, you think that they're going to stay in the faith? You think it's going to be very difficult for them to go back to church? Church for them is a torture chamber. Church for them is bad memories. Church to them is, in fact, a painful place. And not too many of them survive and continue in the faith. Regretfully, that is where I think Scripture says that it would be better for a millstone to be chained around his neck. So one needs to guard against the fact that we misuse the church, okay, to the point of misusing our authority. So, Matthew 5:44, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. If you've done wrong, if you've been done wrong by somebody in the church, it happens. It happens all the time. Our feelings get hurt in a very nonchalant way, and sometimes they get really hurt and really bad, and sometimes they get so corrupt that there's abuse. But what we need to do is, as Christians, and this is twofold, is to love our enemies and pray for them. Love our enemies and pray for them. I think what happens is, in the nuance or in the fact, in the reality that we pray for those people who have done wrong to us, and we continually try and continually call upon God for us to love them, to forgive them, and to mean them well. We, in fact, are doing something that's very godly. So, for example, if we're postal, God's saying to us, don't get a gun and go into your nearest post office and shoot 50 people. No, what God calls us to do is, okay, let's say you've been done wrong. I know a postman, by the way. He was done wrong, too. They gave him a big spiel about taking an early out. So he took an early out, and he got hurt financially big time. So he was kind of bitter for about 4 or 5 years. But the truth of the matter is, as much as Danny looks kind of rough around the middle and around the edges, but he did not take a gun and go into the post office in Lexington and shoot all kinds of people. What I would tell Danny going over this is, Danny, pray for those people that lied to you, that misused you, that said one thing and there was another thing that was completely different. Love your neighbor and pray for them. And we all have those people, don't we? We've all been done dirty. Have not we all been done dirty? Mm-hmm. So the MO is, okay, after you get over the initial shock, and once you get over your initial anger, perhaps even righteous anger, that somebody did you wrong and you knew, and you know that they sinned not only against you, but God himself, then what you ought to do is to love them and to pray for them. And not only pray for them, but pray that God blesses them. All right? So, I don't have my scriptures with me, and you don't either, but we are all familiar enough with the story of the Good Samaritan and how he showed mercy to his neighbor. And that's found in Luke 10:25-37. Now, folks, listen to me carefully, because we as people are sheep. And we as people as sheep have a tendency of following other people. Now, let's take that to the Good Samaritan. You got one guy that comes by, he's a priest and so forth. He sees the Samaritan, the beggar on the ground, and he just bypasses him, and so forth and so on. Then we have another person who does the same thing. I think there was three. There was two, and then there was the Good Samaritan. The one guy, he sees them, and finally the third was a Samaritan, and we know how much the Samaritans were loved by the Jews, right? They weren't really loved by the Jews. He comes along and he takes care of him, he takes care of his wounds, he puts him up in a motel, he gets him a rent-a-car. Nice gig, right, if you can get it? So he takes care of him, he has mercy upon him. I have found that people, and this is not being too cynical because we see it in history and we see it in our own lives, that once a man is down, you know, they say you can't keep a good man down. Well, you can if you keep kicking him. Once a man is down, the groupthink plays into effect. And not only do the two guys come by, and not only do they not help the poor beggar on the road, but I have a tendency of believing that humanity, what they do is they kick him a couple times. You do kick a good man when he's down, or a good woman when he's down. That's called groupthink. If you don't believe me, look at any teenager playground where the teenagers are out there, or even the kids. When one kid laughs at another kid, all the other kids start laughing around. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very lovely red nose.
Shiny nose. Shiny nose.
Shiny nose. And if you ever saw him, you would even say it glows. But nobody wanted to play with Rudolph, you know. This is why I have real neurosis in my own life, because my namesake is Rudy Rudolph, and nobody wanted to play with me either. So, but you know, the groupthink is as such that we are not immune to this as Christians. That people come and not only do they see you on the floor, they kick you a couple times. Now the Good Samaritan comes along. Now, if you know the meaning of the Good Samaritan is in fact, Jesus is an archetype of the man who is being beaten, okay? He is being beaten for our sins, but he's also the Good Samaritan who comes along, so he's both, one can say. In any case, we need to guard against the fact that we are involved in groupthink, or now they use the term tribal. You know, I remember when I was at seminary, there was a big to-do between the border regions and Robert Preuss. Any of you remember those days? I was at seminary in those days. And all I could think of was, you had one guy, you had students and professors who said Robert Preuss was nothing but a dictator when it came to doctrine and his presidency of the seminary. And then you had others who thought that the border regions was way out of line and that they were just a bunch of morons or whatever. Well, not that I'm a moderate by any chance of the imagination, but I did not know enough to make a judgment call as to who was who. I knew that Robert Preuss was in fact a champion of good theology, good Orthodox theology, but I did know personally some of the border regions people, and I also knew that they were in fact people with high standards and incredible amounts of integrity. So who was I to believe? I don't know. I prayed for all of them, and I kept myself out of sight as much as I possibly could. And you know, for me, that's a really hard thing to do. There we go. All right. So,
but at that point in time, when that was going on,
yeah.
there was a lot of divisiveness in the Lutheran Church.
Yes.
And then you had the St. Louis Seminary going one direction, Fort Wayne going the other. Well, Springfield. It was Springfield. Yeah. And then it went to Fort Wayne. Yeah.
Some of the bloodiest wars are not fought on the foothills of the Ardennes in France. Some of the bloodiest ones are fought right in the church, and they take no prisoners. One of the reasons why my wife tells me, I always use military analogies. That's not true. I try to throw in analogies from food and that sort of thing, but life is a fight. And whether you've been in combat or whether you, life is life. Reality, the most fundamental aspect of reality is pain. We all feel pain. We all get cut and we all bleed. And that's not immune to the church. But we within the church have a mandate from Christ or God Himself that when somebody kicks us or does wrong to us or hurts us, maybe we can do what Jesus did in the temple and have this sense of righteous anger, which we can, but we need to continue, as hard as it might be, to love our neighbor and to pray for them and to speak well of them. So that's hard to do. It's hard to do. It's hard to do.
My grandfather used to tell me to remember the 8th commandment.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you need to put the best construction on everything.
Yeah.
And I always told him, I said I was doing the best I could.
Well, no, and that's, you know, and that's very difficult to do. Not only are we not to bear false witness against our neighbor, but we're also, in some sense, we are called to put the best construction on everything, including the circumstances in which that person is in. Now, these are not just pie and listen, folks, I know that this is hard to do. I know that this is hard to do. But we as Christians are called to do that. And we are called as Christians to pray and to love our neighbor, especially those within the church. I think with that whole Preuss thing and the Board of Regents, I think they should have just got together and
But the same thing happened with Kiesnick.
Yes, yeah.
You know, he was trying to change things, and he thought it was for the better, and it wasn't.
Yeah. And and how often, what is it, the road, these cliches, I should know them, they're cliches. The road.
Less travel?
No, the road to disaster is the road to good. The road to meaning.
Something about
It just no. There are many people who mean well.
Yeah, the road to destruction is filled with people with good
It's paved with good intentions.
Say it, Diane, please. Be my memory for
Well,
one.
I sort of got it from the first part. He said the road to destruction is, what is it, Lord?
Paved
It's
with good
paved with
intentions.
good
Paved with
intentions.
good intentions.
Let me tell you a person who probably, in his own mind, thought that he was doing right. Who do you think that was?
Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt, in his ignorance, in his arrogance, in his way of thinking, he in fact, in his mind, I'm not saying that his mind was all there, or that he was right, I'm not saying that, but good intentions does not mean that it's right. It does not mean that it's right. So we have to guard against this, because we as Christians need to always continuously love our enemies, speak well of them. And that's something that we are called to do, not only in the Catechism, but in the Word. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And I'll tell you, that's a tough one, folks. That's a tough one. Number 47, How should we love our neighbor? We should love our neighbor as ourselves and show this love by keeping the commandments of the second table. Matthew 7:12, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets.
Pastor?
Yes, oh, are we done? Yeah, we're done. I don't want to rush this morning. Well, it's great to have you here. Now, I got to tell you, I shared this with others. This morning is still Advent. It's not Christmas. So we still have one more Advent understanding. So until Christmas Eve, until tonight, and then tomorrow. So we want to pray for all those that this season will extend Advent beyond Christmas. The clouds that you see outside, there's no sun. The holidays can be a very painful experience, and I'm going to talk about that during the church. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, light at the end of the tunnel. So let's bow our heads and say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom,